Order. Question number 10, Iain Lees-Galloway.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Immigration. Is the recognised seasonal employer scheme working for New Zealand and for the temporary migrants who work under the scheme?
The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Mr Speaker, yes to both. The RSE scheme has been held up by the World Bank as a model scheme because of its benefits to both New Zealand and the Pacific. For example, in a report released last year, 4 out of 5 RSE employers said they had employed more New Zealand workers as a result of RSE because they could expand their business.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Iain Lees-Galloway.
Does he agree with Kaikoura MP Stuart Smith that the answer to the labour shortage on Marlborough vineyards is to increase the number of temporary migrants who work in New Zealand each year under the RSE scheme, despite the fact that the government has nearly doubled that number already?
The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member may be aware that actually the largest increase in the RSE numbers was by the Labour government 4 days before being thrown out of office in November 2008. They increased the RSE employer numbers by...
Point of order, Iain Lees-Galloway.
The question was, does he agree with Stuart Smith about increasing the numbers now, despite the increase that this government has made? He should address that question.
Order. In framing the question, the member then went on and talked about a recent doubling of the numbers, and the minister has chosen to respond to that part of the question.
In contrast to that, Mr Speaker, this government takes a much more discerning view about where those increases in RSE employer numbers go, including into Nelson Marlborough, when the last increase of 500 last year targeted specific regions with the lowest unemployment. That was Western Bay of Plenty and Nelson Marlborough.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Iain Lees-Galloway.
If he can't bring himself to agree with Stuart Smith, does he agree with Wine Marlborough?
Member will resume his seat. Don't start the question that way. Simply start the question in line with standing orders.
Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Chris Hipkins.
Which part of the beginning of his question was not in line with standing orders?
When he stood up there and the member said, if he can't agree with your colleague, and I said, don't start the question that way, start it in line with standing orders.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
I've ruled, Mr
Point of order,
Hipkins.
Mr Speaker.
Fresh point of order?
It is a fresh point of order, Mr Speaker.
It's not relitigating a decision I've just made. I just want to check on
yes,
that.
it is a fresh point of order.
I'll hear it.
Are you now ruling that a question beginning with the word if cannot then contain a statement relating to the answer that's just been given?
And that's not a fresh point of order. The member's now only attempting to relitigate. It was the reference to the fact that, according to Mr Lees-Galloway, the minister wasn't prepared to agree with the statement of Stuart Smith. That's the part I took objection to. Does the member have further supplementaries? I'm happy to move on.
Certainly do, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Iain Lees-Galloway.
Does he agree with Wine Marlborough General Manager Marcus Pickens, who says, quote, "For New Zealanders who want to get on board, the opportunities are endless. There are jobs for life," end quote. If so, shouldn't he and Stuart Smith focus on how to get more New Zealanders working on vineyards and orchards?
Either of those two supplementary questions, the Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
That is exactly what the government is doing, and the best evidence of that is that while there has been a 10% increase in growth in the horticulture and viticulture industry in the last couple of years, only 1% of the extra labour cost has come from the RSE scheme. This government has been very, very stern with the employers to ensure that they are diligent in employing Kiwis first.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Iain Lees-Galloway.
Does he believe in free markets? If so, will he encourage employers to meet the market by ensuring that pay, conditions and accommodation are sufficient to attract New Zealand citizens to work in horticulture and agriculture?
Again, either of those two supplementary questions, the Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
I'm very sure the Minister for Workplace Relations and Safety has a strong framework for ensuring that fair, flexible and safe workplaces in New Zealand are maintained, including increasing the minimum wage by about 3.4% only a couple of weeks ago. I think he's doing a very good job.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Paula.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Has the Minister seen any reports on the economic benefits to the Pacific Islands that actually come from the RSE scheme? Can he say actually what past governments have done to support that and how ironic it might be that we currently...
I allowed the member to ask a supplementary question. It wasn't a chance to answer three.
Mr Speaker, indeed, I have seen a plethora a plethora of reports about how beneficial this is to Pacific nations. The remittances that are sent back, the skills that are developed and the work ethics identified are extraordinarily positive. I have successive Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Immigration coming to my office saying how valuable this scheme is to them and to New Zealand.
Supplementary question.
Order.
Supplementary question.
Order. Order. Mr Brownlee, I'm giving you your last warning for this week. If you're going to continue to interject when I call for order, you leave me no choice but to ask you to be leaving the chamber. That is your final warning for this week. Supplementary question. Iain Lees-Galloway.
Why should temporary migrants have to work for pay and conditions that New Zealanders won't tolerate? And isn't it in the long-term interests of the New Zealand wine industry to build a sustainable workforce rather than looking for short-term fixes designed to keep wages down and discourage investment in providing better conditions?
The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Mr Speaker, I simply don't accept the prefacing statement in that question. I'm satisfied that overseas workers are being treated fairly and in accordance with New Zealand wage rates. And indeed, I have direct experience of vineyards right around the country where those Pacific workers are enjoying very much the benefits of their productivity and taking significant remittances back to their home countries.
Question